Hey, this is Pierre de la Côte working at Planet Technologies. So I wanted to talk about what are the initial steps you need to do before launching Teams. Um, I see a lot of customers rushing into Teams, and quite frankly, in the past it was because of COVID. But especially when you're launching Teams for collaboration, I think this the key piece is governance. So let me walk you through how I address that. So I think in terms of governance, it's really important to uh, think how you uh, gonna promote teams, not only for chat, meaning that's pretty easy. I think what is more essential is about teams for collaboration because that's the most transformative piece in teams, and that's also a tool that you can leverage in very different direction. So it's really key to give some guidance, and for that you need to have some discussion with IT. I will recommend to invite also business users to weigh in and try to start to identify the type of team. So you need to educate some users, some business users, some business liaisons to educate them on what is possible with teams in terms of collaboration. What kind of teams? It could be a departmental team, it could be a project team, it could be a social team, it could be a common interest team. There's so many potential teams, and that gonna bring a lot of questions. So you need to educate some people first so they understand what they can do with teams, what is the potential, and identify those teams and see if there are teams that are coming with some pattern. For example, a project team might be organized the same way every time you're doing a project. That's what it is at Planet. But maybe a departmental team maybe has the same structure or not. But you have to have that kind of discussion. So identify the type of teams, discussing with the business. You cannot decide that from an IT perspective. It's really a dialogue because IT knows the technology, but they don't know probably well enough the business and their process. So you need to discuss with the business to identify, you know, first round of what kind of teams we're gonna create first. Then you need to define, naming conventions. It will be easier for the end user to identify when they're in a team, if it's a departmental team, if it's a project team, if there are guests in the team, if external team, if it's a committee team, whatever it is, with some prefix, suffix, or naming convention, or maybe sometimes you just want to say, I'm going to have a specific logo for specific team, so I can visually identify. So try to find some naming convention, even if it's visual um, and so it will help end user to see where they are and what is the pattern of the team right away. But also it will help IT to manage teams to see how many project team there are and having a good track on that. Um, and I think what's the most important is to define the process to request a team if there's a process. So I'm going to explain what are the options here, but that's very, very important. By default, it's self-service. So you need to discuss with the business and see the pros and cons of controlling everything or letting teams in self-service mode. Also, at a more technical level, it doesn't need a lot of discussion, but you can define the expiration delay for your teams. That means if the team is not used for a period of time, it will send a notification to the owner saying your team has not been used. Can we delete it or archive it? And then the IT can manage that and either archive the team or delete the team to save some place, for example, and bring less confusion having a sprawl of teams. Um, Also, there are some some customers who don't want to invite guests. So it's important to find out if you allow guests in your teams, and how you allow them. So there are several ways to do that. So you need to have this discussion. Usually, um, it's really important to be able to work with external people. So usually, it's not much, if we can do it. Some customers I've been working with don't allow that, but it's mostly who can invite people, guests, maybe what guests can we invite? Are they coming from a domain name? So that's a discussion that has to happen between IT and some business users, to define the right level of security that goes with it. Um, Choose also the apps that you're gonna enable. Um, Again, by default, there's, I don't know, now maybe 1,000 apps. Some are some sort of certified by Microsoft. Some are from Microsoft, so you can trust those one, no problem. But there are others that, first you need to purchase them, and you might want to have a discussion with IT to see if first if it's needed and if it's secure, if it's compliant. So find out what apps you want to provide, um, with the business users. And also, for compliance reasons, you might want to encrypt some documents, put labels on some documents on some teams, so you can identify if for some teams, that part of the identifying the teams, maybe there's confidential teams or sensitive teams, and you might want to add to those teams MIP, so you will protect the access to the team, the fact that you cannot transfer a document that coming from the team. It's going to be labeled. So there's also discussion potentially if you in a compliance discussion using MIP, for example. So what type of teams? What I've seen often, I think the most common team is project team. But also I saw a lot of customers creating teams for their department, just to have discussion within the department, store documents that are in the department. Important discussion happens also in this team. So you can have a HR team, a communication team, a financial team, whatever. It could be also not at a level of a department, but at a level of a real team, a manager with manages. You can have the team for that. We have at Planet, we have a specific team for my team where we share knowledge and chat from time to time on some subjects. So there's definitely a discussion to happen, because for if you have departmental teams, for example, it can be a struggle because department is might be big depending on the size of your organization, but it can be complicated to manage ins and outs. So you might want the IT to create this departmental team. So whenever somebody is leaving the department, it will automatically leave the team, and it will be transferred to the new departmental team that he has been moved to. So that's also a discussion, managing the ins and outs of a team at the level of departmental. You need to work with the IT team to automate that. Um, so there, other example, I've seen an organization working with committee teams, community teams. That's also very often people who have the same common interest. And make a distinction also between internal team and external team. I think it's important so people understand right away if when they're working, they're collaborating, if there are people externally collaborating with them. I think it can be very important so that people understand. Even if you can see somewhere there's a guest, but if the name is clear, if you're, for example, if you start the name of your team by EXT, it's really clear. Um, so also different ways. I'm gonna explain that a little bit more, but different ways you can create a team and who can create a team. So you need to decide, um, if it's gonna be if the teams are gonna be created by IT, by champions, by managers, by users. Um, what is your policy regarding that? And there are pros and cons on every aspect of it. I have my personal opinion, but there are pros and cons. And when the customer is asking me what is your recommendation, I don't my recommendation is make your own choice based on what are the pros and cons. You need to reflect your culture. I can tell you what I've seen most successful, but it also depends on the culture and the will to transform the way you're working. Um, so and finally, that comes with the departmental team. But decide which team you want to be provided before the launch by IT. For example, the IT team can create a team per department before the launch, just to be sure that um, you know people don't have to create those teams, and so they can do that uh, before the launch, or the day of the launch. Everything is already there. So about the process to request a team. Um, so there, to me, there either you do it in self-service mode. So that's by default. Everybody can create a team. That's my personal favorite. But there are some risks. As we can see, that's my personal choice because it brings business autonomy. If I need something, I just create it. If I need a team, I just create it. But on the other side, the risk is there's a potential chaos because if you don't educate well people, you might have people who create duplicate teams. You might have people who create a lot of teams that are not useful, that are dying, are not used. But since there is expiration, maybe it's not a big problem. It might be complicated in a very uh, in an organization where there's a lot of compliance involved. So because you might want to have a better management, and the risk is quite frankly having a sprawl of teams when you do that. That's to me that's bringing the most value to the business if the business is well aware, trained, understand how to use teams, how to leverage teams, and it's not just a self-service. I'm IT. I gave you this tool. Now you figure it out. I think if it works well when you have a good discussion between IT and the business, and if people are aware and trained on how to leverage teams correctly. Um, you can also, and I've seen that a lot of time, automate the creation of team with a workflow. So you don't allow people to create a team per se in Teams. You might have an app that you put in Team, which says request a team, and then the end user can, and you can define who can. That's another uh, level of control you can have. But let's say that you have this app enabled to everybody, and it's on the tray on the left in Teams. They click on the app. They have a screen in Teams that asks them a few questions. So the name of the team, what is the purpose of the team, if there are sensitive data in the team, some questions um, to explain why you're trying to create this team, and then you can have a workflow um, that either gonna create the team automatically, so there's no change between with the with the self-service, but at least there's a workflow to figure out sensitive. Maybe the workflow will not create the team automatically. Maybe it will send an email to the manager to be sure that uh, this is this team is compliant, or you if the manager is okay with the creation of this team. So you can create whatever workflow to automate the creation of a team. So it will ease for some, maybe for some teams, it will automate it directly, and from other there will be some control. But what is the beneficial here too is it brings some agility because most of the teams can be created automatically, but it has a better control and trackability. That's definitely what is very interesting here. You can see what kind of teams have been created. You can also automate the prefix, suffix, whatever naming convention by this way. Since you have this step that give you a little bit of control. Um, the pitfall, if I can say that, is you have to develop that. So there's several ways to develop it. I'm not an expert in development, but you can use Power Apps. You can use other framework, and also you can definitely you can um, buy a tool. There are a lot of tools that are doing that. They can be very expensive, but they're very powerful. They can really automate the creation of teams with some workflow and populate those teams with some patterns, some folders, some channels already there. They have templates of teams that you can populate really quickly. So it can be very powerful. And there's also with coming with those tools, they can track a lot of things. It's everything is built in those tools that you don't have to build. So it's a matter of usually how big your organization is. If you have a big organization, you might want to purchase those tools because that will help you to manage this potential sprawl of teams, but in a structured way. There's another way. It's to go through a set of people and allow just a set of people to create a team. So you can say, what I like to do is just allow champions to create a team. So there's at least some people who are owners. So maybe not just champions. Maybe it's champions and managers or specific people that what is important. You just give these people the right to create a team. And I thought there was um, a nice way to be sure that champions uh, don't understand well is to ask them to be certified on teams with, you put a training in place and ask them to follow this training. And if the success is training, then you grant them to be a team's creator. Um, so it's interesting because in this scenario, you give responsibility to these people. So first you educate them, but you give them responsibility. So when they create a team, they understand they have some responsibility um, because they follow this training. So they understand that it's specific profile who can create a team, and with specific rights that comes specific needs to manage a team, be sure that the team is respecting some guidance that you're going to provide generally in terms of, especially in terms of compliance. Uh, so that's the benefit. The pitfall might be that if you don't have a good champions team, you will people who want to create a team will depend on those champions. If they're not available, if you don't have time, that might be a bottleneck from some scenario. So it's really a balance. Yes, there's no one solution that brings all the value. And finally, I think one is what usually IT likes, because that's the nature of IT. They like to control things, but you need to be very careful um, to want to control everything. So there's organization that are asking people to open a ticket, and IT gonna create manually the team. That's really risky because the business today um, has to be fast paced and they have to react quickly. They have to be able to create their environment quickly. So if everything is going through IT, there will definitely be a bottleneck, and we probably know that IT is already overwhelmed with a lot of work. So why adding that not valuable task to control what people are doing? I think it's better to give the control more to the business so they can take ownership. So Champions is a good compromiser, um, rather than IT, because then it doesn't help IT on any level, because it doesn't help IT. They don't have the time. People are gonna complain about IT if they control everything. So it will increase the bad reputation of IT not helping the business. Um, and definitely it's not good for the lack of velocity, because everything will be blocked if IT is overwhelmed on something else. So definitely this kind of discussion, showing the different possibilities, having the discussion with the business and the IT, it has to be a compromise, because IT still wants to have some control, just because for compliance reason or security reason or maybe storage reason. So this discussion needs to happen and find a way. My two favorite one are the self-service or the champions. I will say self-service. You need to have very educated. Small organizations should go with self-service, but larger organizations should go with either champions or automated with workflow. I like champions because that give responsibility to the people. But in some cases, if you don't have a large champions committee, that might be uh, not very satisfying either. Then you need to give some user guidelines. I think it's important why when you define this process, that's one thing. You need to indicate on the process. You need to tell you, okay, you decided on this process, how you gonna create a team. You need to educate people or communicate to the people. Uh, what is the process, but then you need also to make people understand what are some conventions, what are the best practices to align how people work. That's really key in teams. It's really key to make people try to work the same way, have the same conventions, so they can understand how they can better work together. When you're switching from Outlook to Teams, obviously in Outlook you organize the information the way you want, but in Teams, it's the same organization for everybody. So you need to find the compromise for that. So you need to educate and on that aspect, and what convention like liking a post means that's a convention. That means I read the post. So that gives feedback to the person who posts the post. Some education to be made on mentioning, because a lot of time people are forgetting to mention. They just post a message and they don't mention anybody, so nobody notices it. So it's really important to educate, especially at the beginning, and not just at the beginning actually, because I've seen a good governance established for maybe several years can be perturbed by a newcomer who had other habits. And I've seen, for example, people using Teams to store documents, sending email with a link to the document in Teams to communicate. And because they were not um exposed to the governance, the governance was not explained to them. So they came with their habits and figure out how they can leverage what was there with their habits. Their habits was to send email with links. So they figured out that they could find the link in Teams and attach it in the email. So you need to constantly explain the governance. I think the governance has to be in the onboarding process so people can understand how to leverage Teams. And there are other guidelines, like how do you use a general channel. Um, I see, I see it. For me, general channel is more to inform all the people. It should probably just be um, used by the team's owner for communication purpose, milestones, stuff like that. But I can understand that you might want to leave everybody post something in the general channel. The problem is if you let everybody publish something in the general channel, they're probably gonna use just this channel. So it doesn't segment enough the work. So it's just like a big inbox per project. It's better than one inbox for everything, but um, I'd rather you to communicate in the right channel because it helps to segment the information you're sharing. So explain the channel principles and some limitations. Explain the private channels limitations that are key, and also, I think it's important to figure out, make people understand how to decide between a team, a channel, a folder, a group chat, a private channel. There's a lot of confusion, so I need to explain all those things and explain how teams work with the folders and the tab. And I have some recommendation: not too many folders, not too many nested folders, and not too many tabs because you don't see them. So that's important to talk about that. And finally, I think my maybe most important recommendation on that topic on governance is not set in stone. This is a discussion that has to happen before the launch of Teams, but this is a living object. You need to revise it from your experience. You learn from experience. You will see, if there are, some governance that are not good or not practical, or if you have some new ideas, like you see a team that you create every time, you create the same thing over and over. Every time you create a team, you're spending some time to recreate a team. Maybe you need a new template. Um, and maybe you need a new naming convention because you see there's this type of team we didn't think about first, and you need that kind of team. So it's an ongoing discussion, and your governance will evolve depending on your experience, on the feedback of people. So you need to get this feedback, and to get this feedback, you need to have a dialogue between business and IT. That's really key in governance. I don't think governance can be made just by IT or just by business. It has to be a dialogue, so people can understand the pros and cons, the constraints of every party, and so they can decide on a compromise. They can find out a compromise. That's the key in terms of governance that I wanted to talk about today. Hope this was helpful.